There's a story buried deep beneath the soil of the American South, one that was never meant to be told. You can drive past the empty fields of Virginia or the swamps of Mississippi and never know what lies beneath them. But every so often, when the wind passes over those fields at night, locals say they hear the faint cries of women who were never free, not even in death. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. It began with a single ledger, found inside a crumbling plantation home just outside Natchez, Mississippi. The pages were brittle, but the handwriting was clear. Dozens of names, all women, followed by strange notations. Good hips, strong milk, bred twice. No ages, no fathers listed, just dates and prices. First, historians thought it was a standard slave record, but as they read deeper, a horrifying pattern emerged. These weren't women being bought for labor. They were being bred, forced to bear children, generation after generation, not for family, not for survival, but for profit. The practice had a name whispered only in the darkest corners of antebellum society: slave breeding. It was an industry that turned human reproduction into a business model, and its epicenter was the Deep South: Virginia, Maryland, Kentucky, Louisiana. But this story isn't about slavery in general. It's about one man, one plantation owner whose private operation became so large, so methodically cruel, that it earned him the nickname whispered by his neighbors in disgust: the Breeder. His name was Silas Caldwell, a man who claimed to be God-fearing, family-oriented, and a pillar of Southern gentility. Yet in the shadows of his property, he orchestrated one of the most disturbing secrets in American history. Tonight, we'll uncover what happened inside the Caldwell estate. The women forced to give birth until their bodies broke, the children who never knew freedom, and the bloodline that still exists, though few dare to speak its name. When researchers first stumbled upon Silas Caldwell's records, they thought they'd found another piece of plantation bookkeeping. Something tragic, yes, but ordinary for the era. What they didn't realize was that this was no ordinary plantation. The Caldwell estate was an experiment, and the people trapped there were not enslaved for field labor. They were enslaved for their ability to give life. Caldwell had learned that by the 1830s, the international slave trade was collapsing under political pressure. Importing people from Africa had become risky and expensive. But breeding was legal, invisible, and immensely profitable. If you couldn't buy slaves, you could simply make them. In the surviving papers, there's one particularly disturbing list, labeled domestic increase. Underneath, each woman's name is followed by tallies, like livestock counts, marking how many children she had birthed, how many had thrived, and how many had expired. The tone is cold, detached, almost mathematical. There are no emotions in those words, only the efficiency of a man who saw reproduction as currency. Witness accounts from neighboring farms describe the same thing. Women locked in separate cabins after childbirth, infants taken away within days. Some were forced to conceive again before their bodies had healed. Others were paired deliberately with men chosen for strong stature, broad build, or good teeth. Those traits weren't for survival. They were for resale value. The horror wasn't in the chains. It was in the silence, the industrial precision of it all. Caldwell's estate was said to produce an annual yield of more than 30 new slaves per year, each one born into bondage, each one marked as profit. And yet, somehow, no one spoke of it. No legal record condemned it. No church refused his tithes, because in the Deep South, wealth could wash away sin. And Caldwell, his fields were rich. His cruelty was not seen as scandalous. It was business. But the most chilling part? Caldwell didn't stop there. In one hidden cellar, there were rooms no visitor was ever allowed to enter. Rooms that local children whispered about for generations. They said that's where the mothers were kept. Women too valuable to be seen, too broken to be freed. The cellar beneath the Caldwell estate was unlike anything found on neighboring plantations. When preservation workers uncovered it in the 1970s, they expected to find a wine room or grain storage. What they found instead was far darker. Rooms too small for comfort, walls too thick for sound to escape, and iron rings bolted deep into the brick. No official documents describe these chambers, but fragments of witness testimony, scattered across county archives, paint a grim picture. One account, written by a runaway who survived the Caldwell fields, claimed that the mothers were kept below ground, in total isolation. These women were never allowed sunlight. Their children were taken at birth, their names erased, their faces forgotten before they could form memories. The purpose of these rooms was control. Caldwell's operation relied on constant conception, and that required both physical and psychological domination. The air in those cellars was thick with mildew and fear. Chains rusted into the walls suggest confinement, but the absence of struggle marks hints at a different kind of prison, one built from hopelessness. Archaeologists found something even more disturbing. Carvings scratched into the bricks. Not words, but symbols, circles, spirals, crosses, and crude depictions of children. Some markings appeared over and over, almost like a code. It was as if these women were trying to leave behind proof that they existed. Locals who worked on the restoration project refused to stay after sundown. They said the air grew heavy and that you could hear breathing in the silence. Soft, rhythmic, like someone still waiting down there. The rumor spread that the Caldwell cellar was cursed, that the cries of the mothers could be heard when the rain seeped through the cracks. Historians tried to rationalize it, sound echoing through pipes, shifting soil, but those who entered the lower vaults alone never forgot the feeling of being watched. The darkness wasn't empty. It was occupied by memory, by centuries of pain sealed beneath the earth. And though Silas Caldwell is long dead, his cellar still stands, a monument to the kind of horror that hides not in myths or monsters, but in men. For nearly a century, the name Caldwell vanished from public record. The plantation itself was left to rot, its fields overtaken by vines and silence. It wasn't until the 1970s, long after the house had collapsed, that a series of strange discoveries began to stir interest again. A team of university historians had come to catalog Civil War sites in Adams County, Mississippi. The Caldwell property was listed only as ruins of minor interest. But when one student pried open the warped floorboards of what used to be the master's study, she found a small tin box wedged between the beams. Inside were bundles of papers, tied with disintegrating string, and one single lock of hair, light brown, carefully braided, and labeled with a name, Dinah. That single artifact began to unravel one of the South's most shameful secrets. The documents detailed birth tallies, private correspondence, and something worse. Letters between Silas Caldwell and other plantation owners, describing the sale and exchange of enslaved women specifically for breeding. It was an organized network, a shadow economy. Each letter hinted at a hierarchy, with Caldwell near its center. He wrote about lineage management and selective pairing. In one, he described a woman as proven stock, docile, fertile, and compliant. The language was calculated, precise. There was no sign of remorse, only profit. When the research team tried to publish their findings, the reaction from the local community was immediate and hostile. County officials denied the document's authenticity. Descendants of prominent families demanded the research be sealed. Some of those same surnames appeared in Caldwell's letters. The tin box, with the hair, the ledgers, all disappeared from the local courthouse archives 2 years later. Officially, they were misplaced during renovation. Unofficially, no one wanted to talk about them. But AFA, carbon copies survived, smuggled out by one of the graduate assistants before the evidence vanished. That assistant, now an old woman, once said in an interview, "They told me it wasn't history, it was family, and family stays buried." But the truth didn't stay buried. It seeped out through whispers, through the walls of the old cellar, through the ghosts that never stopped asking to be seen. When the Civil War ended, the Caldwell plantation was burned and abandoned. Silas Caldwell himself was never brought to justice. Some say he fled to Louisiana under a false name. Others believe he died in hiding, buried in an unmarked grave, far from the land that made him rich. But what he left behind wasn't just ruins, it was blood. Records show that several of Caldwell's children, both those born of his wife and those born in secret, survived long into the 20th century. Many took new surnames, moving north to escape their father's infamy. But DNA doesn't vanish with a name. Across generations, whispers of strange resemblances followed them. The same narrow eyes, the same slanted jawlines, the same unspoken shame. By the 1940s, descendants of the Caldwell line had scattered across the South. Some were white, some were black. None knew the full story of where they came from. One woman, interviewed in 1992, recalled her grandmother forbidding her to speak of the old house. She remembered an attic trunk filled with yellowed photographs, faces that looked too similar, too close, almost mirrored. It felt, she said, like everyone in those pictures was related to everyone else. Psychologists have a term for it: intergenerational trauma. Pain that transfers not through memory, but through behavior, silence, and fear. In families like the Caldwells, that silence became its own inheritance. Some descendants turned to faith, others to denial. But deep down, all carried a sense that something in their blood was not entirely their own. Locals near the old plantation still tell stories of a child seen wandering the fields at dusk. A girl in a white dress, barefoot, hair the color of rust. They call her Dinah's daughter. No one knows if she's real or legend, but her story lives on in the whispers of those who still feel tied to that land, unable to move on, as if some part of their family history refuses to rest. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? By the early 2000s, ancestry testing had become a casual curiosity. Something people did to trace their roots, to find out if they were Irish, Italian, or maybe part Cherokee. But for a handful of families in Mississippi, Louisiana, and Virginia, those simple tests opened doors that had been locked for over a century. It started with one woman, her name withheld in every article since. She had ordered a basic DNA kit as a Christmas gift from her son. When the results came back, they didn't show what she expected. Her family was listed as European, but there were distant genetic matches to multiple African American lineages across the Deep South. The shared ancestor? Silas Caldwell. More people tested, and more matches appeared. White families, black families, names that had never met, but shared the same blood. What once seemed like rumor or superstition became scientific fact. Caldwell's forced breeding program had produced hundreds of descendants, scattered across America, all connected by a history none of them had chosen. Some refused to believe it. Others broke down in tears. A few even traveled to Mississippi to see the ruins of the Caldwell estate for themselves. Standing there, among the moss and the decayed stones, they described an overwhelming sensation, like the ground itself was trying to confess. Archivists reopened old county files and found mismatched birth records, sealed wills, and notes in margin handwriting, property to be retained for domestic increase. For the first time, the ghosts had documentation. A quiet movement began online, with descendants forming private forums to share what they learned. One message stood out. We were born free but made from chains. What do we do with that? No museum has ever displayed the full story. No monument bears the Caldwell name. But through DNA, the truth has already escaped the grave. It moves now through our generations, alive in the blood of those who never asked to inherit it and can never give it back. If you drive down Highway 61 at night, past the quiet farmlands and forgotten towns, you can still see the faint outline of the Caldwell plantation in the moonlight. The house is gone. The fields are empty, but the silence feels heavy, as if the land itself remembers what was done there. Historians say America's wealth was built on cotton, tobacco, and sugar, but that isn't the whole truth. The real foundation was human life, the buying, selling, and breeding of people. For every brick that built a mansion, there was a mother whose child was sold to make it possible. For every field that bloomed white with cotton, there was blood beneath the soil. Silas Caldwell was just one man, but his legacy was systemic. He didn't invent the practice of slave breeding. He perfected it. And in doing so, he mirrored the machinery of a nation that saw bodies as assets and life as inventory. The Civil War ended the trade, but not the mindset. The same hunger for control, the same dehumanization, simply changed its clothes. Today, we like to believe history is past. But the past isn't past. It's living memory. It runs through the bloodstream of America itself, pulsing quietly beneath modern progress and polite conversation. Every time a name is lost, every time a story goes untold, the ghost of Caldwell's field whispers again. Remember us. Some say that late at night, you can hear it if you stop your car by the old stone gate. The faint sound of chains dragging through grass, followed by the cry of a newborn, carried by the wind. Others say that's just folklore, the imagination of people who want the past to have meaning. But maybe it's not folklore at all. Maybe it's history refusing to die. Maybe it's proof that what we bury never truly stays buried. And so, when we speak of freedom, of equality, of justice, we should remember the price paid for those words. The price was life. The pikandan rice was generations. The price was people who were born only to be sold. Because in the end, America didn't just inherit their blood, it inherited their silence.